There are signs Australia may be spared from blanket tariffs on all steel and aluminium bound for the US. The President Donald Trump has confirmed he's giving great consideration to Australia's request for an exemption following a phone call today with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Here's National Affairs correspondent Jane Norman.
No sooner had he ended his 40-minute phone call than the Prime Minister delivered the news to the media.
We agreed on wording to say publicly, which is that the US President agreed that an exemption was under consideration.
The phone call followed Donald Trump's declaration that he'd impose blanket tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Anthony Albanese arguing for a carve-out like the one Australia secured in the first Trump administration.
It was a very constructive and warm discussion.
I just spoke to him, very fine man.
But an hour later,
this is the beginning of making America rich again.
In the Oval Office, the President appeared to contradict the Prime Minister.
It's 25% without exceptions or exemptions, and that's all countries, no matter where it comes from.
Before then contradicting himself when asked if Australia would be spared.
We have a surplus with Australia, one of the few. And the reason is they buy a lot of airplanes. We actually have a surplus. I told him that that's something that we will give great consideration to.
Relief in Canberra as the President effectively parroted the government's talking points, that we buy far more from the United States than they buy from us. F-35s and Boeing aircraft included. Australia seeking to leverage the trade surplus and the alliance.
The Prime Minister deserves support in whatever measure is reasonably taken to see a reversal in the tariff.
Australia sends about $1 billion worth of steel and aluminium to the United States from BlueScope Steel, Rio Tinto and Alcoa. While the volumes are low, jobs could still be at risk.
The direct impacts are quite small because of the direct exposure we have to the US trade and US trade. But the global growth pulse being weaker is a concern for us.
There's hope Australia may be spared a direct hit in Donald Trump's multi-pronged trade war, but we're not out of the woods just yet. A White House statement issued late today confirms Australia is not currently exempt from the new tariffs due to come into effect in a month. That gives the Albanese government a very narrow window to score a very big diplomatic win. And complicating negotiations, the White House statement specifically calls out Australia. The volume of US imports of primary aluminium from Australia has surged. Australia has disregarded its verbal commitment to voluntarily restrain its aluminium exports to a reasonable level.
There's possibly a tussle between the national security, diplomatic people and the more purist economic and trade people who think there should be no exemptions.
We'll continue to engage diplomatically, and we, of course, will use all of the human assets at our disposal.
The door, at the very least, has been opened. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prime Minister is optimistic but knows this is only a first step towards securing a deal. For more, here's Chief Digital Political Correspondent Jacob Grieber.
From the moment Donald Trump was re-elected last year, the opposition has questioned the Prime Minister's diplomatic chops, his ability to handle an emboldened, famously capricious president intent on throwing his weight around, and whether former Trump critic Ambassador Kevin Rudd is the wrong person in Washington. Even moments before today's call, one shadow minister urged the Prime Minister to draft Scott Morrison and Joe Hockey to the cause. Instead, a jubilant Albanese has landed a valuable personal concession from the President, consideration of a tariff exemption. It's a positive first step, but there are still dangers ahead. The tariffs begin 4 weeks from now, and there's a hardline faction within Donald Trump's White House that hates the idea of Australian aluminium makers getting special treatment. It took his predecessor, Malcolm Turnbull, the best part of a year to land a similar deal. The looming election means the Prime Minister may not have the luxury of time.